Good morning. I can see the participant numbers are starting to go up, so I'm just going to wait for everyone to join to start off with. But as always in these sessions, I'd be really grateful if someone wouldn't mind popping in the chat box, whether you can hear me, you can see the screen, just so I can check everything's going okay from a technical point of view. So if someone doesn't mind saying hello or I can hear you, that side of things, I'd be very, very grateful. Excellent. Hello. Thank you so much for letting me know. Thank you. So before we start officially, I'll let you know what this morning's session is going to cover and what it will be like. So what I'll do in a couple of minutes, I will do the presentation officially. So I'll turn my camera off. You'll still be able to hear me, and we will run through the presentation. Now, during the presentation, I won't be able to answer your questions. So feel free to post questions in the chat box as we're going through things. But what I will do then is when I've finished, then I will pop my camera back on. I will bring up the chat box and then I will run through your questions. So we'll do it that way. The main thing that I can help you with is advice with regard to sitting the strategic case study exam, and specifically talking about the August 2024 sitting. As I run the elite course for Viva for August 24, I can answer any questions that you have about the structure of that course, what we cover, what the course is like, etc., etc. Any questions in terms of pricing and in terms of payment terms and that side of things, then they need to go to Viva, really. So you can go onto the Viva website, you can scroll down till you get to the CIMA courses and select strategic case study, and then there will be information there. Through the website, you can pop your questions on there, or you can use the email address info@vivatuition.com. So as I said, I will try to answer as many questions as possible. Now, I can see a question on the screen saying, will this presentation be available after the session for revision purposes? As far as I'm aware, Viva usually send out a recording of this and the slides to those who have signed up for the session. So as far as I'm aware, that will happen, and they normally do that within about 24 hours after the session. Just to answer that question for you, generally, what happens is in the first sitting, which is May 24, when the webinars happen, they are all recorded, and then you get a copy of the slides and you also get a copy of the recording. Because you are the second sitting for this pre-scene, then all of those webinars have been recorded and all of those materials are available right away. And during that means for the second sitting, I think it's sometimes a bit of an advantage. It means that you have access to all of those up front, and then you don't have to wait for the live sessions. You can choose to work through those as you want. If you're going to be on the elite course, which is where you have access to all of those pre-recorded webinars, the elite course gives you 6 workshop sessions. They're about 2 hours long. They're with me. They are live. They're very, very participative. And I think we have a couple of office hour sessions as well, which are very informal. You can just drop in. You can ask whatever questions you like. They are live, and there's a timetable for those. Again, you can find that on the Viva website, or I can answer any questions about that afterwards. So another question on the screen, can you provide a little detail around the hour-long tutor sessions that Viva provide? Of course I can. I'll cover that now before we go into that. So if you're on, let's call it the basic course, I'm not entirely sure what the name is, you have access to 5 mocks and the solutions to those mocks, and the mocks are excellent. They are excellent preparation for you. They're designed to cover what we think are the most common exam day scenarios, and through doing the mocks and having a look at the answers, you're actually going to be able to revise your technical content as well. I think we need to get across for strategic case study that the mocks are actually part of your learning rather than a test. Yeah, so they're going to build up, obviously, and you can test yourself the more you go through. Then if you're on the elite course, there are 6 sessions with me, and they are called workshops. They're about 2 hours each. And what we do is the first one will be to really brainstorm through a question. I'll choose one from a past exam paper so we can talk about exam technique, what a strategic case study answer looks like, and really get you set up to be in a position to do the first mock. And then workshops 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are detailed mock debriefs. So we center those round each of those mocks. I try to present my answers, but we critique and debate my answers, and students feedback in their thought process, what they put, and you can ask very, very specific questions. So you might listen to my debrief on a particular task, and you might say, well, Laura, I put X, Y, Z. What do you think of that? Is that worth merits, or how could I make this answer better? Or you might have the right ideas, and you might say to me, well, how can I develop my answer a little bit more? So the mocks are very, very much about that individual feedback. We talk about it as a group, and I'm very, very interested in people's, I would say, thought processes, because if I can get across that you have the right thought process, then you're going to be flexible enough to be able to react to whatever the exam throws you throws at you come exam day. There are 2 shorter sessions as well on the elite course. They're called office hours. They're very informal. And essentially what I find is people always give me a lot of questions in advance, things that they're worried about, whether that be technique, whether that be a technical area, or anything else from the pre-scene, and we run through those. So essentially on the elite course, my aim is to try to make sure that everybody's individual concern or individual question is answered as we go through mock by mock, or as you're coming across technical areas that you're not sure on. So that's what I try to do on those. So I'm just going to have a look at these little questions here just to make sure before we start I've answered any question. So can we advise on the timetable, as the link online doesn't work and the draft was sent to me by email? It's very different to the guideline by week that is shown. Okay, Simone, I can. What I'll do afterwards, I'll bring up my diary and I will let you know the dates. Now, because this is the August 24 sitting, it isn't perfectly a week by week basis for the workshops, and that is due to holidays. And so we've tried to spread them out. And what I would do in the first elite session, which I think is tomorrow, the first office hours, we would then, if you're on the elite course, we would talk about how we're going to fit in the mocks with that workshop pattern. So we would work that out. So I can bring up some dates, or I will make sure, I'll take a note of your name and I'll make sure that those details go out to you as well. So I'll bring my diary up at the end, and we'll be able to have a wee chat around those dates for you. So the pattern isn't per week as it normally is, and that is simply due to holidays. Okay, so what I'm going to do in a moment is I will turn my camera off and we will run through this slide pack. It should be round about 45 to 60 minutes. What I'm going to do is give you a little bit of an introduction to the company that you will be studying for the August 24 exam. That's SafeWell. We're going to have a look at a couple of pre-scene facts, then we'll have a look at some exam day scenarios, and then give you a list of the technical areas that we think are the most commonly tested at strategic case study, and those technical areas are then covered in our course as well. Then we'll finish off with a little bit of advice to get you to prepare for strategic case study. And after that, I'll pop my camera back on and hopefully be able to answer as many of your questions as possible. Okay, so I will just close off the chat box now and I'll turn my camera off and we will crack on with these. So welcome to our presentation on Mastering the August 24 Strategic Case Study. And what we're going to cover this morning is we're going to run through some key pre-scene information for our pre-scene for August 24. So this is the same pre-scene pack that was used for the May 24 sitting. After that, I'm going to run you through some of the key technical areas that you will need to have a good understanding of and be able to apply if you want to be successful in your strategic case study exam. After that, I will give you some top tips and advice to help you build an action plan towards sitting strategic case study in August 24. And after that, I will hopefully be able to answer any questions that you have with regard to the course. So let's start off by having a look at our pre-scene for August 24. As I said, this is the same pre-scene that is used for the May 2024 sitting. Now, it's always quite exciting when you're teaching strategic case study to see what the company and what the industry is going to be. And for May 24, for August 24, the company that we have is SafeWell. Now, SafeWell is quite an interesting business. I was quite happy when I saw this one. It is a company that offers physical security services, but also intelligence-led risk advisory services. So there are two very distinct aspects of the business. The larger one by far is the physical security services. When you look in the pre-scene, you will see that 85% of SafeWell's revenue is from the physical security services, and 74% of their operating profit. So it is the key area. And both parts of the business, as I said, are fairly distinct. The employees that are involved in the businesses have very different skill sets, and the services that they offer, which I'll cover in a moment, are very distinct and separate. And at board level, we have two separate board directors, one in charge of physical security services and one in charge of intelligence-led risk advisory services. So Bai is in charge of physical security services and Mura in the intelligence-led risk advisory services. Both of those sit under a single CEO, Greg. So very, very distinct parts of the business. And when it comes to approaching an exam day scenario, you need to really think, does this impact both areas of the business or just one area of the business, and make sure that you're tailoring your answer appropriately. Now, SafeWell is based in the country of Barland, and it uses the B dollar as its currency. And as is typical within strategic case study pre-scenes, Barland is a developed country, and we're told it has an active and well-regulated stock exchange. So when you're looking at the efficient market hypothesis, we'd be thinking about a semi-strong market here. Now, the company is well established. It was founded in 1920, and then it quoted on Barland Stock Exchange in 1991. It is a very large global company. So let's have a look at some facts from the pre-scene around that. So the company has 460,000 employees in the security staff that is operating in 74 countries. So a large business and a global network on the physical security side. And then it has 22,000 risk management consultants. And those consultants provide worldwide coverage for the intelligence-led services. So very much a large global company. Now we're going to have a look at each area of the business in a little bit more detail. So we're going to start off by having a look at the physical security services. Now this is just a high-level overview. The pre-scene is broken down into a lot of detail into pre-scene webinars, and I will have a look in those webinars at the detail and what you can draw from that detail. So just an overview here. So the first physical security service that SafeWell offer is reception services. So SafeWell provide SafeWell employees to act as security and reception security in client premises. And their main aim here is to restrict access to that client's premises to employees of the client and legitimate visitors. So a very, very important role there in terms of safeguarding the company's assets, the client's assets, and safeguarding the client's employees. Another service is site security. So SafeWell employees are contracted by clients to protect, let's say, factories and storage sites. And the role there is to protect against theft, so to safeguard assets, but also to safeguard the client's staff as well. Retail security is another area where physical security services are offered. And the retail security here has two functions. The first one is to act as a deterrent against theft, so against shoplifting, so to be a physical presence, to be seen, and therefore to deter theft. But also where there have been instances of theft, then SafeWell staff are there to gather evidence to aid their clients, their retail clients, in the prosecution of thieves as well. Now we're going to have a little look at some pre-scene information that will give us a little bit more insight into how SafeWell positions itself in the market when it comes to its physical security services. So the first piece of information that I focused on in the pre-scene was that SafeWell offer its own training programs for security guards. And it does this with the aim of exceeding the minimum standards in each of the jurisdictions that it offers. So it was quite interesting to prepare for this case study, because I have to say, as always with strategic case study, I didn't know a lot about the industry to start off with. And one of the things that you will find is security guards, physical security services, is a highly regulated and licensed industry in multiple jurisdictions. So I'm UK based, so I had a look at the UK, and there are various different licensing requirements, training requirements, and certifications. So SafeWell is positioning itself well above the minimum standards for licensing. So we might think, why are they doing that? Perhaps they're doing that to get ahead of the curve in case legislation and regulations become harsher. Well, they'll already be ready for it. Or perhaps they're doing it as a source of competitive advantage. So to position themselves above the minimum, perhaps a little form of differentiation, and win clients that way. Also, they pay well, and we're told that they exceed competitors' hourly rates for pay by up to 10%. So we can see the fact that they are spending more on training programs, the fact that they're spending more on pay, may mean that they're not necessarily a cost leader. When we have a look at the principal risks, you will see that one of the identified risks is the reliance on staff. So there is a risk around being able to recruit and retain sufficient staff. So their current strategy may not minimize costs in the short term, but perhaps this focus on training and better pay could actually be more cost effective in the long term if it helps them retain those staff and manage the principal risk. Now we're going to have a little look at the intelligence-led services. So there are a number of these. First up, they provide risk advisory services. So SafeWell's consultants will be contracted by clients, and they are there to provide independent advice to the client on the client's strategic business decisions. So the word independent there is interesting, and they pick up on this in the pre-scene. They can perhaps provide that more distant, objective approach, and maybe point out some risks or observations that maybe the client's board and the client's management haven't seen themselves. They also offer corporate investigations. So these are very tailored investigations depending on what the client wants. And this might cover things like operational concerns. So an example here may be a fraud investigation, for example, or it could be in relation to the client's business relationship. So maybe the client is thinking of taking on a new supplier partner, and they might ask SafeWell to do an investigation into that supplier before they enter into that relationship with them. The other investigations that they also look at is maybe the client is considering making a new appointment, maybe a board appointment, and again, they will contract with our consultants at SafeWell to look into the potential candidates and provide advice thereon as well. A service that is offered in relation to client cybersecurity is penetration testing. So SafeWell's consultants will have a look at client systems, advise on any weaknesses or vulnerabilities from a cybersecurity point of view, and advise on how those weaknesses can be addressed and cybersecurity can be improved. And the final service the consultants offer to clients is training. So they will offer training to clients' management, to clients' boards, really to update the technical skills, the risk management technical skills for those at the client who have responsibility for risk management. Now, as we said before, like our physical security services, this is a global business. So our consultants are required to travel to assignments worldwide. And we have a track record on a global basis. So SafeWell has completed consultancy and training projects in 132 countries. So those introductory slides will give us a flavour of the industry that we're looking at. I find it really, really interesting. I've really enjoyed this one. Now we're going to have a little look at SafeWell's strategy. And in doing this, I'm going to give you an overview of the mission, the vision, and the core values. These are really important areas of the pre-scene. I find that I will quote and apply these to many, many exam day scenarios. So let's start off by having a look at the company's mission. So the company's mission is to provide clients with security solutions and services that they require in order to be able to focus on their core business. The mission here really underlines SafeWell's role as essentially an outsource provider, provider that will partner with clients. They say here that they will take on the responsibility for security or risk management or cybersecurity advice. And the benefit that that brings to the client is that they can focus then on whatever the client's core business is. And as with many outsourced providers, I think the aim here is that SafeWell can provide these services more cheaply or more efficiently or with more expertise than the client could do itself in-house. SafeWell's vision is to be the security industry's most trusted advisor. Now, I think this is a really, really important statement, and the key word here is trust. When we look at the principal risks, you will see that one of the identified principal risks is reputational risk. And I think this is absolutely core to this pre-scene. SafeWell is a service industry. So it provides people, it provides advice. And if trust is lost with clients, for example, if there is an incident of failure, maybe to safeguard assets or safeguard people, or an incident where SafeWell consultants have not provided robust advice, then trust will be lost. And if trust is lost, essentially, then SafeWell's reputation is damaged. And the reputation, in my view, is a critical success factor. It's going to be a source of competitive advantage. Why would you go to SafeWell if you no longer believed that the advice they provided was trustworthy? Or why would you contract with them for physical security services if you no longer trusted that they could safeguard your people and your assets? So the vision, I think, is really important. And trust and reputational risk, I think, are going to be key themes for the case study. The core values are as follows. We've got 3. The first 2 very much have a client focus in my view. So SafeWell is responsive and SafeWell is innovative. So I think those 2 are very much with a client focus. We will listen and respond to client needs and hopefully come up with innovative solutions for clients as well. And then the final core value is about another key stakeholder, and that's our employees. So SafeWell treats its employees with respect and also cares about their safety. Again, tying into the principal risk with that heavy reliance on staff. Again, we're a service industry, so very, very reliant on staff. So we care about their safety. As I said before, I would make sure that you know the mission, vision, and core values. They are frequently used. So for example, in strategic evaluation, you can draw on the mission and vision. So is the proposed strategy in line with the mission and vision? Also, when SafeWell has carried out an action or maybe failed to carry out an action, you can compare that with the company's publicly stated core values. So stakeholders will see the core values of being responsive, innovative, and caring for staff. And how does that compare to what SafeWell has actually done or not done in a particular scenario? So really, really useful information there. Governance is always a key theme at strategic case study and heavily tested. So let's have a look at the board structure. So the SafeWell board has 5 executive directors, 3 independent non-executive directors, and a non-executive chair. So we can see from this that the board is not independent. It doesn't comply with corporate governance best practice to have at least as many non-executive directors as executive directors. Now, this is something we can definitely use when we are critiquing the governance, if it is relevant in a particular task, but I would point out that this is not unusual for a strategic case study pre-scene. It's actually pretty typical for a strategic case study pre-scene. Please make sure that you are comfortable with the role of executive directors as opposed to the role of non-executive directors. We can frequently see questions where you might be asked what the board should do in a particular circumstance. And one of the things that's helpful is maybe to think about what the executive directors would do, and then think about what the non-executive directors would do. Alternatively, you could be specifically asked what would the non-executive directors do in a particular circumstance. And if you don't have that good understanding about the difference between an executive director role and a non-executive director role, then that becomes a wee bit trickier to score well. In a nutshell, I think it's really important to remember that our non-executive directors are there to be independent. They are not there to have an operational role. They don't set the strategy, they don't implement the strategy, they don't determine, for example, internal controls and policies and procedures, and they don't put those in place. All of that is done by the executive directors. What our non-executive directors are there to do is critique and challenge the executive directors. They are there to be the shareholders' eyes and ears and hold the executive directors to account. And an important part of the non-executive director role is to sit on the various different board committees. So if you're specifically asked about non-executive directors, please remember their role is for independent challenge and critique, and all to sit on the various different committees of the board. We do have a company CEO, that's Greg, and a non-executive chair, Pratima. And so we do comply with corporate governance best practice there to have those 2 roles as distinct roles and held by separate people. And as I've mentioned, the board committees are very important. They are all staffed by our non-executive directors, and SafeWell has the following board committees, each with 3 members, and the members are the chair and the non-executive directors. So we have our audit committee, the risk committee, the remuneration committee, and the nomination committee. This is as we would expect and is typical for a strategic case study. One thing that's unusual, or that I noticed about the SafeWell board, is we have an executive director, John, who is the director of legal, risk, and business ethics. So this is something that we don't typically see at strategic case study. For me, I thought, gosh, what has the company done in the past to need a director of business ethics? And so I think business ethics usually gets tested, but maybe even more so for this sitting, given the fact that we have the director of legal, risk, and business ethics. Another governance weakness that you will probably notice when you have a look at the case study is we don't have, at board level, a chief information officer, a CIO, or a chief technology officer. You will see there's going to be a heavy reliance on data. Cybersecurity is very, very important because we hold a lot of sensitive client information, but perhaps it's a governance weakness that we don't have a CIO on board role. Another thing for me, a potential weakness in our governance, is we don't have a specific HR director. As I said, it is a people business, it's a service business. We see the principal risk of that heavy reliance on staff, but to have no specific HR director on the board, again, a potential weakness. I said that governance is very heavily tested. So what type of questions might you get in relation to governance rather? Well, there's lots. You might be asked to critique certain governance weaknesses, perhaps with regard to risk management. That's a very common question. You might be asked for the merits and demerits of a new board appointment, whether that be an executive director or a non-executive director. Very scenario specific in those cases. So we would have to use the unseen information. And you also might get asked about maybe having a new committee. We can see we've got 4 committees here, but maybe in the unseen scenario, we'll see a specific issue has arisen. And one of the things the board is considering doing is maybe setting up a new committee to address this specific issue. And you might be asked for some governance considerations, so advantages and disadvantages around that. So again, these are things that we want to do our thinking for before exam day, make sure that we have thought through the implications of these, and then you will be ready to react to whatever you see on exam day. So next up, we're going to look at the principal risks. So this is, you'll hear me say this many, many times throughout the course, this is the single most important page within the pre-scene that I use all the time. If something's a principal risk, then it is extremely important to SafeWell. So whether you are asked about strategic implications or strategic evaluation, or to prioritize issues in an exam day task, well, if it touches on one of the principal risks, either to exacerbate that risk or maybe mitigate or reduce that risk, then it's going to be a priority for the board. It is a principal risk, and therefore, we have an inbuilt prioritization of points, and we will have the board's attention if we mention anything to do with the principal risks. So what we're going to do now is I've just summarized the principal risks. We'll look at the identified risks and what SafeWell's current response or mitigation to that risk is. So really make sure that you're very, very comfortable with that principal risk disclosure and the current mitigations, because it is very frequently used. So let's have a look at our identified risks and responses. So the first one I've already mentioned, both the physical security services and the intelligence-led security services have a heavy reliance on staff. They need to recruit and retain appropriately trained, skilled, and licensed staff. And the current response to this risk is basically around HR policies. They closely monitor staff turnover, and as we said before, they provide industry-leading training and also industry-leading rewards. Okay, so very important to remember that. Our next risk is, it sort of echoes one of the core values about respecting staff and making sure staff are safe. So it is recognizing the fact that staff, both the physical security staff and the intelligence-led consultants, are exposed to health and safety risks. I think this is more obvious when we think about physical security staff. So they are clearly exposed to physical risks in terms of their job, but also the consultants, the intelligence-led consultants that are traveling worldwide, are exposed to risks through traveling to different jurisdictions as well. So the response to this is to always carry out a rigorous risk assessment. And they say within the principal risk document that if a new client contract comes along and they assess that that risk is unacceptable, then they will refuse and turn down that contract. So this is showing that they will prioritize employees over clients, over profit, where it is necessary to do so. For our physical security staff, they will also provide appropriate safety equipment, and they will make sure that all staff have appropriate risk briefings and training in order to keep them safe. This one is extremely important. I've mentioned it before, and it ties into the company's vision. So SafeWell is exposed to reputational risk in the event of an alleged failure. So this could be a failure in terms of the physical security staff or the intelligence-led staff as well. And this is one, as I said, it ties into that vision, that aim to be a trusted advisor. And if, for example, SafeWell fails to manage its own risk or fails to manage a client's risk, then it's going to have a very negative impact on those service offerings. They're going to be less credible as a result, and that could be very damaging to their ability to retain clients and also to win new clients. So in this case, the response is very much staff focused. So training of staff. So if we can train staff, hopefully there won't be a failure in the first place. And then also supervision of staff to make sure that that training and the policies and procedures are put into place. We're then told that client contracts can be complex, long-term and high value, and they can have onerous terms and also be denominated in the client's currency. So we have some foreign currency risks referred to within this risk. And the response to this risk is that contracts are reviewed in detail by in-house legal staff. Now, this is a point that I use many times when looking at strategic case study answers for this scenario. So we will have a chat later on about foreign currency risk. And those contracts being long-term is very interesting, long-term and high value. It shows that some clients, or I infer from this, that we're really partnering with some clients. So we become their outsourced provider, maybe not just for a single event, but over the long term, and really taking on that partnership and that service role with them. And that elevates the status of clients as being a very, very important stakeholder, a key player when we look at that. So we can also draw down on that. So if you see a client in an exam day scenario, we can draw on this and it will help us understand more the strategic implications of maybe any reputational damage with that client. And also it helps us put us in the client's shoes and understand that we are looking for a long-term relationship when we're looking at working with SafeWell. And the final one is information security risks, including information held relating to client security and strategic management. And as you can imagine, this means that SafeWell has to make heavy investment in cyber controls and defenses. It is carrying that very, very sensitive information, either about the client's strategy, which the consultants are advising on, or about the client's physical security needs and provision of physical security, which obviously has to be kept confidential. Now, all of these risks are not mutually exclusive. So, for example, if there is an incident with regard to information security failure, that also would impact on the reputational risk, and potentially, if it was damaging enough, it could impact on staff and retention of staff. So as I said, very, very important. And I find that I apply these in an awful lot of tasks. Now, let's have a little look at the competitive landscape. We get more information, I would say, in this pre-scene than is typical for a strategic case study pre-scene. So we're told that SafeWell has the second highest global revenues of the security companies that we are provided with. So again, this goes to underline the size and status of SafeWell. Its main competitor, one that we're told it frequently competes with for the same assignments, is Brotto Security Group. And we're provided with comparative financial information for Brotto in the pre-scene. Brotto Security Group is one of 4 security companies based in Barland that, like SafeWell, offers both physical security services and also intelligence-led services. There's some more detail provided on other competitors, and we're told that some security companies, such as Growbar Facilities, which is the world #1 for global revenues, they offer security services, but also offer a wider range of services like facilities management. So that might be cleaning services, maintenance services, that side of things. So Growbar is by far and away the biggest, and then SafeWell is next. But Growbar offers services, facilities management, that SafeWell and Brotto Security don't. We're also provided within the pre-scene of other smaller companies, some of which solely specialize in the intelligence-led services, and others which solely focus on the physical security services. So I think these may be provided perhaps as targets for potential acquisition. But we have details on their revenues, and I think there are about 10 competitors in total. As I said, a little bit more disclosure than we would normally see within a pre-scene. Now, the finances, I'm going to be quite light touch on this. I cover them in a little bit more detail in the pre-scene, but to be fair, I don't tend to draw down on the financial information massively when I'm preparing a strategic case study answer. I do draw down on some facts now and again, such as maybe gearing or the dividend payout, but actually we don't tend to use the finances that much. So in 2023, SafeWell's revenues grew by 6.4%, and they've grown by slightly more than the comparative information for Brotto Security Group, which grew by 5.3%. When we look at the profit after tax, SafeWell grew by 10.7%, however, not as much as the Brotto Security Group, which grew by 15.1%. So perhaps we'll be under a little bit of pressure from our key shareholders in order to push up that profit after tax. Dividends are quite interesting. So for SafeWell, the dividend paid, and to be fair, we only have 1 year's dividend, they represent 89% of profit after tax. So a very, very high payout. And we can infer that this might be important to our shareholders. So our shareholders are looking at having that high dividend payout as opposed to reinvesting the profits within the company to grow. The comparative figure for Brotto Security Group is similarly high, it's 86%. So again, we can infer perhaps this is typical for this industry. The share price graph, I find this quite interesting. I do use this quite a lot. Now, you can have a look at the share price history within the pre-scene webinar, within looking at the pre-scene, but the closing share price is about $41 dollars, and we have a beta of 0.88. Now, a beta, as you'll know, is a measure of volatility. So we have a positive correlation with the market. So when the market goes up, on average, the SafeWell share price goes up. When the market goes down, on average, SafeWell share price goes down, but it doesn't go up as much as the market on average. It goes up 88% of that, or it doesn't go down as much as the market on average, so slightly less volatile than market. I like to use the share price graph to help me think about the shareholders' perspective, because as you can imagine, shareholders are going to be a really important stakeholder in the business. So I like to look at the share price history and think about if I was a shareholder and my share price, my capital value had had that journey, what does that make me think about the SafeWell board? What does that make me think about any particular impact on the share price that we might see in an unseen? So I use it very much for context in answering questions where you're asked to analyze or explain why the share price has reacted in a certain way. And I also use it for context when I'm thinking about the perspective of a shareholder and what a shareholder might think about a share price movement. So the share price graph, I think, is a really, really useful piece of information. Now, there are loads of potential exam day scenarios. During the Viva course, we will talk about potential scenarios through, I think, all of the webinars. We certainly reference them through the pre-scene. We have a look at some questions when we look at the applied series. So I love the applied series. We have one for P3, one for E3, one for F3. And as well as doing a technical top-up, we have 4 potential exam day scenarios in each of those webinars, and we provide, a high-level answer to those. So combining all of the hints and tips through the webinars and the 5 mocks, hopefully that will give you enough potential exam day scenarios so that you're ready for exam day. So I'll just give a little flavor here, but the course will cover an awful lot more. So one thing that I think would come up is having a look at new services. We know SafeWell's revenues have grown, we know their profits have grown, but there will always be that pressure from shareholders and those institutional shareholders to grow those revenues and profits more. So they may need to look at new services. So what areas could they potentially move into? Well, the first one might be property maintenance and cleaning. As we said, Growbar Facilities is the largest by revenue, and they offer maintenance and cleaning, and that isn't something that SafeWell currently does. So maybe that is a potential area to go into. From a physical security side of things, they don't offer cash in transit services, so maybe collecting cash from retail premises or banks or that side of things. Private prisons has been one of the most interesting areas in preparing for this case study. So when you look at real world comparators for SafeWell, you will see a lot of them take on government contracts to operate private prisons or offer services within the prison service. So I think that is a highly likely topic that could come up. It's a really rich testing ground in terms of ethical considerations as well. Very interesting. And when you look at the news articles that are at the end of the precinct, you can see that one of them talks about forensic accounting and how the demand for forensic accounting is increasing. So this would infer that this could be a rich area for SafeWell to go into to increase its revenue and increase its profits. And in fact, Greg, our CEO, used to be in charge of a large accountancy firm, so maybe a lot of experience there. Acquisitions are always tested in at least one of the variants at strategic case study. So as we said, if we're looking at growing those revenues and profits and we need to do so quickly, then maybe an acquisition will be attractive. So SafeWell could acquire a business to gain access to either a product or service or a market or both. As we have that heavy reliance on people, so for example, if we wanted to move into forensic accounting, an acquisition might be a good way to do so because we would acquire a company that already does this and therefore has the skills and the people there already. So that might be a quick way to move into that area. I think legislative changes is again something that we can expect to see in some unseen information. We are a highly regulated industry in terms of the physical security services. And as you will see throughout the pre-scene, the government of Barland and the other jurisdictions in which we operate is going to be a very, very influential stakeholder in setting legislative standards and regulation for that service. So legislative changes that you may see in an unseen could be where the powers that physical security guards have are changed. In the pre-scene, physical security guards don't have any special powers or rights compared to the average citizen. So they don't have the same powers as the police, as the army, the military, etc. But maybe we will see a change to that. There is a news article at the end of the pre-scene that talks about privacy laws with regard to CCTV. CCTV might be something that we want to use to enhance our services in physical security. So maybe we'll see some restrictions around that. There's an article at the end of the pre-scene that talks about shortages for staff in the police and in the military. The reason being because these individuals are leaving to go and work in private sector for physical security services. So we might see the government taking action in order to address this recruitment crisis in these areas. So maybe there will be restrictions placed on current police and military staff, restricting them from working in the private sector for a certain period of time after they leave employment with the government. That would be massively impactful on SafeWell. We know we have that heavy reliance on staff, and we're also told in the pre-scene that they do recruit a lot of ex-police and military. And then the last potential legislative change, this is one that is stated within the news articles, again at the end, there is a new digital security disclosure regulation to come into force. And that is very much along the lines of transparency with your stakeholders if you have had a digital security breach. So this legislative change, I think, could be both an opportunity and a threat for SafeWell. It's an opportunity because clients are going to require advice on this. Are our security measures around cybersecurity robust enough? What else do we need to do before the disclosure comes into place? And also, we might have to advise clients that have had a breach in terms of complying with the new disclosure. Where it's a threat, we might see an exam day scenario where SafeWell itself has had a successful cyber attack and Does it disclose this? Does it comply with the new law, even though to do so would potentially damage its reputation and credibility to offer those cybersecurity services such as penetration testing or risk advisory around that? So that could be a really, really interesting area. And then the other key area is reputational risk. I've talked about this a lot. SafeWell might need to manage the implications of a range of unseen scenarios. So we might have a physical security guard that has taken inappropriate actions in a particular circumstance. Maybe we're going to see poor risk advice provided by our consultants, or as I've said, a cyber attack, either on SafeWell or on a client that would have the associated negative reputational aspect. Now, there are loads of scenarios that are typical with regard to this type of reputational risk. You might be asked how to deal with stakeholders, identify their needs and how we're going to manage their needs in this scenario. You might be asked to explain share price movements that have happened after an event. Let me think. Oh, yes. What else you could get asked is what is the impact on maybe some of the wider integrated reporting capitals? So maybe you could get asked to explain the impact on maybe the human capital or social and relational capital, and then how we should work to mitigate this impact. That would be quite a common question. Even reputational risk, you could build that into strategic evaluation. Like I say, it's a principal risk. We always need to think about it, or strategic implications of anything that we're looking at. So that's just a flavour of some of the potential exam day scenarios that you might see. Now, when we're moving on to the key theories, I'm going to provide you with an overview from P3, from F3 and E3 of how you should prepare yourself. If you do choose to sign up to a Viva course, we have the Applied series webinars. There's one for each of our pillars. And I think they're fab. They're my favourite ones to teach. And I think they're really useful because we cover the theory, and then what I think is really important, we put it into practice with a potential exam day scenario. So let's have a look at these. So to start off with is P3. So it is a very important part of your strategic level syllabus. And students tend to find questions in this area could be a little bit tricky. I find that it's the one that students worry the most about, and they're a little bit iffy on it. So let's have a look, and then I'll give you a little bit of advice. You might be asked to identify risks in any particular scenario. So for risk identification, I would also include risk assessment in there. I always use my unseen information supplemented with the pre-seen to think about the likelihood of a risk happening, and then also importantly to assess those and help me prioritize those risks. I think about the impact of that risk as well, and that helps me structure my answer for risk identification. You might be asked to make suggestions to manage those risks. And again, where you're asked about managing risks, what we're looking for is very, very practical suggestions. So you might want to use the TARA model as appropriate to transfer, accept, reduce, or avoid. And when you're looking at risk reduction, the R in TARA will be looking for internal controls. What I always say to students is be practical and also be commercial. So we don't want to suggest some form of risk management that's going to cost more than the actual exposure to the risk itself. So practical and commercial is what we're looking for there. We've already had a good chat about corporate governance and some of the types of questions that could come up there. And similarly, we've also talked about reputational risk and some of the scenarios where we might see that. And again, you might be asked for mitigations or what actions you need to take after an event that has led to some damage on reputational risk. Risk registers, you need to have a good idea of what a risk register is for and what a risk register includes. What I would say here is please remember that this is an internal document. The risk register is going to be more detailed than the principal risk disclosure that you see in the pre-seen. The principal risk disclosure in the pre-seen, that is public disclosure included within the annual report and accounts, but the risk register is an internal document. Questions you might get asked there are about risk ownership. Who maybe should be an appropriate risk owner? Should that be collective for the board as a whole, or should it be given to an individual? That's one of the types of questions you might get asked there. As I said, when we talked about managing risks, you need to have a good understanding of internal controls. What we want here is typically you will get something has gone wrong in your unseen. You need to be able to laser in on the individual steps or internal control weaknesses that allow this risk to manifest itself, and then make internal control recommendations. And as I said, they need to be practical, and you need to remember a cost-benefit analysis for those as well. Internal audit. SafeWell does have an internal audit function. We're told that within the pre-scene, and it is a very, very common area to be tested. So make sure you know the purpose of internal audit. And one of the most important features of internal audit is that it needs to be independent. So our internal auditors won't have any operational role, because then that would prejudice their independence, and they can't have that objective oversight of maybe the internal controls or special investigations and that side of things. Questions that you might get here is it appropriate to use internal audit to do X, Y, Z? Maybe they are going to look at control weaknesses and make recommendations, or you might even be asked for tests of control. So maybe a control has been recommended. How would internal audit then test if that had been implemented effectively? And the final area for P3 is cyber risk. And again, this is a key area. We've already talked about this. We need to be over this because SafeWell provides advice on cybersecurity risks to clients, but also don't forget that SafeWell will have its own cybersecurity risk, and that needs to be managed as well. F3. Now, F3, it is frequently tested at strategic case study, and I'm going to cover some of the topics. Now, I said P3 was the one that students worry about the most. However, at the beginning of courses, I tend to find that students worry about F3 the most. But as they build up a little bit of experience in mocks, and as they see how the F3 content is tested at strategic case study, then they tend to feel a wee bit better about it. It is quite high level. It isn't going to be any detailed calculations. For example, you need to be able to talk about the various issues that I'm going to show you sensibly, but at a fairly high level. And it is all about application. So what we don't want to have is a theory dump or any generic theory. It has to be applied to the unseen information and applied to the pre-scene. So a really standard question will be asking about sources of finance. So perhaps part of the task is to look at an acquisition or a potential strategic choice the board are considering. And then to the extent that they want to go ahead, you are asked to look at various different sources of finance. You might be given a specific source of finance. So specifically, for example, you might be asked about the appropriateness of a rights issue, or what you need to consider in relation to a rights issue, or you might be asked at a more high level for appropriate sources of financing. The key thing, as I've said, you've got to apply it to the unseen and the facts. So broadly speaking, you could be comparing debt finance with the impact on, for example, debt covenants, the impact on gearing, for example, and equity finance, whether that be through a rights issue, or you might even see a share for share exchange for an acquisition, for example. When you're looking at sources of finance, you can also be asked about the impact on the capital structure. So, for example, the impact on gearing. SafeWell's gearing is currently 40%, and Broad Security Group, our only comparative, is 52%. So we can infer that there's some headroom there for a debt raise, subject to the impact on covenants and that side of things, but you might be asked about capital structuring as well. The dividend policy comes up now and again. As I said, we have quite a high dividend payout, 89% of profit after tax, and you could get a question on maybe changing this and the impact on shareholders, or you might get a question that there has been some sort of a windfall and the board is looking at a one-off increased dividend, then returning to normal levels and really looking at the merits and demerits of that. A very common question and very important for this pre-scene, because we've seen the international aspect of the business, is managing currency risk. So make sure you know the basics, make sure you know the common hedging strategies and mitigations and the advantages and disadvantages of those, but you must apply these to the unseen information. You've got to tailor it to the fact pattern that you're given. And again, make sure that you're very, very commercial. Think about the cost of some of these hedging strategies versus the exposure that the company might have based on the unseen information. It's normally transaction risk that we're asked about, but you might have to touch on translation risk or economic risk, and you might want to touch on the international Fisher effect, again, only at a high level. Remember, we said those contracts were long-term in nature, so that exposes us to more currency risk. If we're looking over a longer period of time, it's harder to predict which way foreign exchange movements will go. They're high-value contracts, and that increases the impact of currency risk, and those contracts are complex, so we might need a mixture of different hedging strategies for different aspects of the contract. We do have a treasury team within SafeWell, so we do have internal experience there. So that's something that you can draw on as well. Business valuations are very commonly tested, normally with regard to an acquisition. And normally that acquisition would be of a private business. So we don't have a published market cap, and you have to look at some business valuations. Again, it's high level, but it must be tailored and applied to the unseen information. It's also possible you could look at a business valuation if SafeWell decided to divest part of its business. That's less likely, but it is possible. I've already mentioned integrated reporting, so make sure that you're comfortable with the 6 capitals. Where we tend to see this tested is if there's been an incident, and then we're asked to talk about the impact or potential impact on a number of the capitals. You could also be asked maybe about how those capitals or increase in those capitals could be measured. So you might be asked for some performance measures there. Now, less common than currency risk is interest risk. So you might be asked about managing interest risk. That could be tied in if you look at sources of finance and you're recommending debt finance. And again, try not to worry too much about that one. It is not, like I say, it's less commonly tested. But even having a good working knowledge of the merits and demerits of having a variable rate or a fixed rate, etc., will help you there. And then another area that is commonly tested is share price movement. So typically you will see an incident. It's never really a good incident when it comes to the unseen. So something's happened, the share price has reacted over usually a couple of days, and you get details on an initial reaction and maybe what happened to the share price and then where it ended up, and you have to explain that movement. So really building in our efficient market hypothesis there. E3 tends to be the area that people are most comfortable with. So you do need to have a good understanding of E3. And as I've said all along, it is about application more than anything else. Now, E3 brings benefits. People are generally more comfortable and have more to say, but that also brings a danger when it comes to answering your questions, because you've got to watch your time carefully. When we're tested on E3 topics that we're more comfortable with, it's really easy to run over time, and that's what I see as the danger here. So you might be asked to evaluate a strategy. So using the suitable, acceptable, feasible model, or another common type of question is looking at strategic implications. So if we do this, what would be some of the strategic implications? Stakeholder management is really important. As I've said before, sometimes you're asked to identify and assess the needs of a stakeholder based on a certain event that you're presented with in the unseen, and then you have to provide practical advice on how you're going to manage those stakeholders' interests. So to prepare for that, definitely have a look at the pre-scene, use Mendello, and prioritize your key players. So employees, government, clients, especially those that we partner with over the long term, and investors. But do remember that that analysis will be fluid and could change depending on what you see on exam day. Now, ecosystems, this is an interesting one. I've not seen these directly tested, but you do have to have an understanding of SafeWell's ecosystem and how the various different players depend on each other and react with each other. So a good example here would be the government. The government is very influential on SafeWell due to its power to legislate and regulate, especially in the physical security industry. However, it could become a more complicated ecosystem if the government was also to become a client. So, for example, it might contract with SafeWell to operate prison services, for example. So that would be an idea to think about for ecosystems. Digital transformation, this is tested sometimes. Personally, I tend to find this a little bit trickier. So what I would do is I would make sure you go through the pre-scene and look at all the areas where you think the business could be improved by digitization. And a great way to prepare for this is to step outside the pre-scene and look at real world comparators and have a look on their websites, look on their recent news and what they're doing. And I find that this will make me more confident in this area. So for example, on the physical security side, you will see that competitors are using CCTV in remote control rooms where that CCTV is analysed by artificial intelligence. So it looks at people's body language and movement and can analyse those against a risk profile to point out where the highest areas of risk will be. So make sure you have a little look at some real world information for that one. Ethics is tested multiple times, so it's highly likely you will get a variant that has an ethics question. And what you're asked to do there is discuss the ethical implications of a certain situation, and you will be expected to draw down on objectivity, integrity, confidentiality, professional behaviour, and professional competence and due care as appropriate to that scenario. And remember, we have our director of ethics there as well. Digital strategies, I'm going to group that in with digital transformation. As I said, the best thing to do, in my view, is to prepare for that by having a look at real world comparatives. You might be asked for performance management, so maybe suggest measures to manage certain performance. And change management, you might be tested on, I would say, at a high level. Typically, we see this where we've made an acquisition and we're looking at maybe some of the problems that the board will need to consider in bringing those two different cultures together. So now that I've given you a long list of things to do, let's have a little look at an action plan. So passing strategic case study is going to require the following. So first up, you need to familiarise yourself with the mechanics of the strategic case study exam. So it is split into 3 questions. Each question is typically split into 2 subtasks, and you have some unseen information, and you get 1 hour for each of those questions. So a 3-hour exam, assuming you're on standard time, and that is 1 hour for each of 3 questions. And each of those 3 questions is typically split into 2 subtasks. You do need to have a really good knowledge of the strategic level syllabus. That said, I don't recommend that anybody solely looks at their strategic level syllabus in isolation and studies just by, can I rhyme off this E3 theory or F3 theory? You must do it in combination with the pre-scene and with the industry. It's got to be applied. You've got to learn it in an applied way, because we don't want a theory dump in the question. It's all about application. The most important thing for me is exam technique and how to answer a question. So sometimes I will have a student on the course in the elite group, and they have sat the exam before and they've decided to come along and join a Viva course. And normally after the first or second workshop, the student will have what I call an aha moment, and I love it. So they come to me and they say, Laura, I can see what I've done wrong in the past. I can see that I needed to apply the knowledge more, or I can see that I needed to develop the points more for that strategic level audience because we're writing to the board. And that always is a good thing for me, because that student, they may have just missed out by a couple of marks, so they have a good solid foundation. They've got that knowledge of the syllabus, they've got the understanding of the strategic case study exam, no worries there. And I just need to give them an extra couple of things in their tool bag that they can deploy on exam day that they didn't have last time. An exam technique and time management and staying focused on the requirement is absolutely essential. That is the thing that we focus on, I would say, more than anything when we come to the workshops. We talk about the thought process. What does my thought process need to be in order to produce this answer within the 1 hour that I have? You do need to have a really good knowledge of the pre-scene. Now, again, we don't want a pre-scene dump in your answer, but it is essential for context. You cannot put anything in your answer that will conflict with the pre-scene, because you work in SafeWell. You are the senior finance manager there, and it provides the context of what things are important to the company. For example, the principal risks, for example, the mission, the vision, the core values. Along with exam technique, time management is essential. And I think this is the most difficult skill to build. As I said, you've got 1 hour for each of 3 tasks. You need to read the information, you need to plan your answer, and then you need to write it up. And one thing that I like to do is be quite granular when it comes to students in terms of time management. Now, I'm not saying what works for me works for everyone, but at least we can talk through what you should do, and then you can practice and rehearse and come up for a time management plan that's going to work for you. So when you go in on exam day, you've got something that you know works for you. It is a very passable exam, but it does require consistent work and commitment. And by far and away, the most important thing that you can do is the mocks. We don't want you to wait until you feel comfortable before you do your first mock. You're just going to have to dive right in. And remember that at least those first couple of mocks are your learning process. You learn through doing the mocks. I think that's one of the mindsets that we need to challenge with students on the course. So the mocks aren't there for you to get, let's say, a pass first time. Think of them as practice exercises, and at least those first couple of mocks, you're going to do those to try and learn exam technique and practice and experiment with your time management. And in doing those mocks, you're going to pick up on the strategic level syllabus, you're going to pick up on pre-scene knowledge, etc., etc. Now, each student, I know this, I see it on the course all the time, has their own circumstances and will have to come up with their own action plan. But here's some general guidance. First up, let's get you committed. So book in to the exam. And once you're done with that, then make sure that you become familiar with the exam. You can either do that through our course, or there's excellent resources on the CIMA website. You can look at past papers and become really familiar with the structure of the exam and the types of questions. Then you need to go through your pre-scene document. As I said, it is essential for context. You need to know that really well. As you are progressing through the course, try to revise areas of key theory and do that in a very much applied way. So for example, I'll take a very easy example. If you were revising stakeholders and you were looking at Mendeley and you're looking at your key players, for example, we'll do so with the pre-scene in front of you and map on information from the pre-scene to that model as you go through it. Do that with every single area. So you will be practicing the pre-scene, practicing your key theory, and practicing application as you go through. The most important thing is to do this week by week, ideally, and attempt those mock papers and practice questions. I think it's important to start the mocks early and then critically appraise how you have done. Identify your weaknesses based on those questions and then brush up maybe on technical areas, maybe on time management, maybe on developing your answer, and then put all of that into the next mock and keep doing that on an iterative basis. And just keep on top of that key theory and the pre-seen and test yourself on a regular basis in an applied way. One of the best things to do is think about a potential exam day scenario and simply brainstorm that. What would you say? What pre-seen information is relevant? What strategic level theory is relevant? And I think the more that you can brainstorm and just keep thinking, the better. Students say to me that is a key skill. If they practice it and they've got that, then they can react on the day. For me, this is a skills-based exam. It's not a learn and churn exam. You need to be able to think on your feet. And practice will help. It makes perfect. So the key to passing any exam, you know this by now, you've got to this stage, is about practicing. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, mocks highlight key weaknesses. Students criticize my mistakes and my answers in the elite course sometimes, and that's great. I try to do some of the mocks to time, and then we talk about them in the class. Now, they're not the perfect answer, and that reason is because I have an hour. Nobody can produce the perfect answer in an hour, but when we reflect on it afterwards, then we get better. So the next time, those better ideas will be at the forefront of our mind to start off with. So it is really important that you are not shy about making mistakes and learning from them. And invariably in the elite course, I'm always super impressed with the students and how open they are to sharing their mistakes and sharing their thought processes, because we all learn together in that. So in finishing up and closing, it is a very passable exam, but you need to practice and prepare. Like I say, skills-based exam, we need to practice thinking on our feet and brainstorming. So if you feel ready, consider drafting a study plan and book your exam. Everyone's study plan will be different because you've got different timeframes and different commitments. But you should build in having a look at your strategic level syllabus and having a very good working knowledge of that pre-seen document. From the get-go, try to practice questions and doing the mocks. So for those of you that are going to be on the elite course, for example, tomorrow in our office hours, we'll start to chat about that. And then the first workshop, it's all about putting you in a position where you can attempt the first mock. And this is a great skill. You need to take time to review your performance in the mocks and analyze where you can improve. The Viva answers are very, very good, the suggested answer. And the question to ask yourself, in my view, is you look at your answer, you look at, let's say, the Viva suggested answer, and say to yourself, well, what does my thought process need to be to get there? How would I be able to look at that requirement, look at that unseen information, and then make the connection to the ideas that are in the Viva answer, and then develop the ideas that are represented in the Viva answer? If you can practice that skill, then it is highly likely that you are going to be able to react appropriately on exam day. Yes, you might see something tricky, but you will have practiced thinking on your feet, and then you're going to be successful. So finally, all I want to say now is very, very best of luck in strategic case study. It's really, I do enjoy teaching it. It is lovely to see people get over the line and qualify after what is sometimes a really long journey to qualification, but it is worthwhile. Definitely. Getting my professional qualifications is something that was definitely difficult, and it took a long time, but for the past, 30 years, I have been very, very grateful to have them. Don't regret it, and it pays off, so keep going. So thank you very, very much for your time and attention. You can see the email address there, info@vivatuition.com. So if you have any specific queries with regard to courses, pricing, signing on, that type of thing, then you can email there. And then otherwise, I am going to hopefully be able to answer some questions for you now. Oh, you're still with me. I am going to open up and see if we have any questions here. So the recording, as far as I know, Thomas at Viva usually shares that one. And so I would be expecting that to come through. That's one thing I will email Thomas and double check, but he usually shares it. So what is the difference between a senior independent director and a non-executive director? No problem at all. So good knowledge of the pre-scene there. So you will see that we have one of our independent non-executive directors, who is called our senior independent director. And essentially, you'll see this if you look, let's say, at any UK board of a listed business, and they step in for the chairperson if they can't chair a meeting. So they are almost like the chair's deputy. I haven't seen it specifically tested or drawn out in a strategic case study exam yet, but that's their role. So if the chairperson was indisposed or there were too many commitments for the chairperson, then our senior independent director steps in their place. So hopefully that answers your question there. Okay, so just a question on sharing the recording, which hopefully I have answered. Anything else I can help you with? Is anyone nervous about strategic case study, looking forward to finishing and qualifying at last? What do you think of this current industry? I find it really, really interesting. I did like it very much. So I'll stay here a little bit longer, but if you don't have any questions, then thanks so much for joining us. Well, it's this morning for me, depends where you are. And hopefully I will look forward to meeting some of you. Oh, great question on the screen. So for the first mock, is it best to go cold turkey or review the theory at the same time? I love this question. Okay. What I would say is before you do your first mock, I want you to do a minimum of two things. So the first one is have a look on the CIMA website at a strategic case study exam so you get a feel for the format and what it looks like. For those of you that are going to join me in a workshop, that's what I will do in the first workshop for you. So I'll cover that with you. That's the first thing I want you to do. The second thing is you should be really familiar with the pre-scene. You've got to have that context. And then what I would do for the first mock, I pretty much would just dive in, but I wouldn't put yourself under time pressure. Now, this is just how I would do it. So I would look at those three tasks as really practice exercises, and I would give myself a little bit of time to craft an answer and have a look at that. If you are signing up to a Viva course and you're not on the Elite course, there's a great webinar called Good Answer, Bad Answer, and I would also watch that first, but then just dive in. I find that if students put themselves under time pressure as well, it's just too much for the first couple of mocks because you can experiment and think, oh, you know, how would I do this? But yeah, I think you just have to rip that Band-Aid off and dive on in. So I can see some students quite nervous. Yeah, I would be nervous. I even still remember my final exam and I'm still nervous. It was a long time ago, but the industry is interesting. I really like it. And that's another benefit of having a look at real life examples. It kind of brings it to life. So how much study should you factor in? Now that's a really good question. I mean, it's going to be different for different students because of your time commitment. So I would say you need to prioritize, on average, doing a mock per week. So maybe not this week because, you know, you've got to get to grips with the pre-scene, etc. But then to do a mock. So a mock, if you're doing it to time, which I definitely would do mocks 3, 4, and 5 to time, it's going to be at least 3 hours. And then I think you need at least as much time again to debrief that mock. So to go over the Viva answer. And as I said, really think, what does my thought process need to be? How could I have come up with this answer based on the information I had? So the mock alone, I think you're looking at about 6 hours per week. And then on average, I'm a massive fan of little and often. So you need to give yourself the time for the mocks, But then I would try to keep your study quite active. So always pick, let's say, the technical area that you're the most stressed about and do that first. I would have a quick look in your notes, see what it is, but then I would have the pre-scene open and I would brainstorm how might this be tested, or what information could I come up with if this was tested, this technical area in the exam. Very, very practical. And if you're looking at the webinars, so if you are going to go on a Viva course and look at the webinars, then you need a couple of hours per week to do those webinars. Sometimes students watch the webinars multiple times because I'm talking quite quickly, and they'll break it down. And then they might, for example, in the applied series, maybe do the P3 webinar one week, and then the following week, cover up the answers to the questions that we've done and see if you can brainstorm and remember everything that was discussed. So about 6 hours for the mock, couple of hours for the webinar, and I would say that's the minimum. But also remember how much you can cover in 5 minutes. So you might say 5 minutes, right, employees. They're a key stakeholder. What do I know in the pre-scene about employees? So you might say, okay, there are 460,000 of them in physical security, 22,000 consultants. We have training over and above the minimum levels. For physical security, we pay more. Principal risk, 5 minutes brainstorm is really effective, and also I think keeps stress levels down. So try to slot in really effective 5 minutes here and there as well. So you're worried about starting the course and the timetable. So you've only just sat E3 on Tuesday and haven't read the pre-scene, so you feel very behind. Now, the course is super flexible. Even if you're on the elite course, and this is something that I'll talk about with the elite guys tomorrow, we will come up with a workable timetable, because those first sessions are sort of bunched together, and then there's a gap, and then we have the other sessions. So one thing that I want to do when I see who's on the elite course and when we have a chat tomorrow is come up with something that we feel comfortable about, and we can do that. So please don't worry, everyone's going to be in the same starting block. And what I might actually do for the elite course on that is we might decide to do slightly different things in those first workshops, and then maybe combine some other ones as well. So the elite course is very bespoke. So we'll see the group, we'll see people's concerns, and if you were on that, I would build it in. If you're not on the elite course and you're doing the standalone course, then you can time it however you choose. So I wouldn't leave starting the mocks too long, but you can fit it in to give yourself, a couple of weeks, and then maybe set the first couple of ones and do that side of things as well. So I will very much try to react to student needs. We always do, okay? So waiting for management case study result. But if you pass, should you take strategic case study because you've done everything under the FLP? What a great question. Well, first off, fingers crossed for your management case study result. For me, I think strategic case study is easier than management case study. Now, that might be quite controversial, but students tend to say the same, not at the beginning of the course, but after the course, because it's not as technical. Would you say that? I probably would, because I find when I take a break, or when I used to take a break from studying, then it would be harder. And if you have all that information up here and you're fresh, well, why not? Why not dive in and have a go? So yeah, I would probably think that's absolutely fine. I'd be comfortable with that. Nervous, I get that people are nervous, and that peaks and troughs during the course for sure. But again, what I want to have is quite a structured approach, and we do practice together. What do we do if we see a question and we haven't a clue? The doomsday scenario. And it's lovely for me to hear back from students sometimes to say, oh, I got the horrible task, I didn't know what to do, I panicked for a minute or two, and then I thought, okay, we've practiced for this. What do we do in this scenario? So hopefully that will help with nerves a wee bit. So all the board members have been appointed within the last 3 years. Can we assume this is something to do with share performance? That's a really good observation. I like that very much. That is typical for a strategic case study pre-scene. And I don't quite know why the examining team put that in there, but I almost think it's in there so that the current board essentially can't be blamed for anything that's gone on in the past. So it's very typical for strategic case study to have a very relatively new board in there. It's nice to see that you're linking it with the share price graph. I haven't really seen that drawn out specifically in a question. But yes, it could be that the per share price performance means that they wanted a new management team in there as well. So it's quite a typical fact profile that we would see for strategic case study. Great, good to see some people on the elite course, and I promise that we will make a work pattern that suits everyone. The webinars should be available for those who have signed up to the courses. Again, that is something that I will double check with Viva. But there are no live webinars for the second sitting. That is because they have all been done. They've been pre-recorded from the May sitting. And as I said, I see that as an advantage to you because then you can choose to study as you want to. So you're joining on the elite course. Will there be revision notes for the pillars? No, they are not provided with the course, as far as I know. What you will have is the applied webinars. They are fairly high level, and as far as I'm aware, and you'll need to just double check this on the Viva website, there are slightly more detailed technical recaps, but not full level notes for that. One thing I would say though is you probably don't need to worry too much about that, because what students find is when they go through the mocks, when they go through the course, it is tested at a much higher level than you have been tested before, either, whatever route that you have come through. So most students find that they can become quite comfortable with the technical level stuff quite quickly. Okay. So you're aiming to sit strategic case study in November, so not sure to enroll on now, or will the same course be in November? Okay, that is a really good question, and I like someone who plans in advance. What I would say is November will have a different pre-scene. And the full course will be run to November based on that pre-scene then. So my advice to you will probably be to wait and join for the November course. However, there are a couple of things that you could do to make yourself feel more comfortable. So if you want to feel that you're moving forward and not waiting, I would suggest that you go onto the CIMA website and you have a little look at the past exam papers. That will just give you a little feel for how it's tested and familiarize yourself with the structure of the exam. You can also go on, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, for the first pre-scene webinar for this sitting. And that will give you a feel for the type of information that we draw out of the pre-scene. It won't be relevant for you if you choose to sit in November, but it'll give you a flavour of the exam. And then what you can do is you'll be ready to hit the ground running for the November course and when we see the pre-scene for that sitting. So hopefully that is helpful. So you're a bit thrown by the service industry. So much of E, F, and P are focused on, manufacturing. It's definitely going to be a new way of thinking. I really like that observation. So for example, when it comes to valuations or operations and that side of things, we do have to keep remembering that we are a service industry for sure. But again, when we get into it and you do the mocks and the practice, you'll be fine. But it is good that you note that up front, because that shows me that you're already having that applied thinking rather than just churning out, previous theory. And it's 3 tasks rather than 4. So that's good. Everyone's always really happy about that compared to that. So as far as I know, this webinar recording will be sent to you if you have registered for the session. Normally that's what Viva do on that, so you should get that in a day or so. So hopefully that has been helpful. Okay, so fantastic. So what I am going to do now is just thank you all for your participation. For those of you that have signed up for the Elite course, the first office hours session is tomorrow. And what I'm going to use that for is just to really come up with a nice working timetable that works for all of us. I want it to work for people. I don't want people to get overly stressed out up front. And we'll come up with a nice plan of working. Like I say, there's a little bit of a gap due to a holiday, but I'm going to make that work for us and make sure everyone is comfortable. So if this is essentially, if I'm not going to see you again, very best of luck. As I said, keep going with your studies. It is very worthwhile. If I am going to see you in some of our mid-course check-in or end of course, well, I look forward to answering your questions there. And if you are joining me on the Elite course, then I will see you tomorrow and we'll get cracking and make sure everyone is okay. Excellent. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. And I hope it's been useful this morning. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.